Good evening. This is Eric Brown. This is the Monday, September 15th edition of Detroit in Black and White presents Reality Strikes with Eric Brown. And last week I did part one on the state of education, primarily in Michigan and urban communities. My guest last week was a very intentional and deliberate advocate for education, James Beasley of Detroit, Michigan, former commissioner of the Cable Commission in Detroit. This week I am doing part two, and I have three educators. Actually, I have attorney Vanessa Moss, who is the co-host of Detroit in Black and White on Wednesday evening, Friday evening, and Saturday morning. She is also, in addition to co-hosting that show, an attorney, as well as a professor down at UD Mercy, teaching in the undergraduate and the graduate, teaching at the undergraduate and the graduate level. Have Quan Nellums, who is a career counselor with Wayne Risa. He soon will be teaching over UD Mercy as well come January. And I have Ernesto Q, who is a former board member for the Ann Arbor Public School System and also a professor at at Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor. Is Ann Arbor or Ypsilanti? I'm always confused about which city it's in.
It has an Ann Arbor address. It has an Ann Arbor address.
Both cities claim it. So for those that are viewing, I would like you to like, subscribe, and share. And good evening, Karen Winston, our first and I'm looking at YouTube. So those that are on Facebook, I'm sorry if I don't see your names listed, but I do appreciate you listening to the show on Facebook as well. And you're on mute, Quan, so you need to take yourself off mute. And good evening, Jill Sheridan. So the Florida show last week, I talked about the, M-STEP scores that just come out on the 27th of August. And last Monday was the day before the National Assessment on Educational Progress report was going to be released. It has since been released. And again, it's not good news, particularly for urban community such as Detroit. Ypsilanti, the scores of Ypsilanti were not much better than Detroit. But one of my frustrations to my guests, I want to let it be known, was the celebration by Detroit Public Schools celebrating a 12.9% proficiency rate for third graders. And that's those that are at grade level. So only 12.9% of the third graders are reading at or above grade level. And one of the questions I have asked the some board members over at DPS, as well as the administration office itself, what exactly is that number of those that are above grade level? Because at the end of the day, you give most of those students a fourth grade book, they will not be able to read and or write a project on that particular subject matter. And that's something that, I'm sure all three of you can speak to, because in your experiences, even at the college level, I'll go to the college level first before I come back and hit the K through 12 level, which you were teaching at once upon a time, Vanessa. What do you see as some of the issues impacting, be it negatively or positively, with regards to students coming to college prepared or unprepared?
Well, of course, I want to be very diplomatic as to how I answered that question. Um, I have seen situations where it's clear to me. Here's the deal. College is a business, right?
Correct.
And so you have people enrolling in college. They get in debt. They take on a substantial amount of debt, right? Um, Seeking to get a degree, get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And what I have seen, and I'm not necessarily saying this at where I currently teach, because I've had some teaching experience previously at other institutions, but it's clear to me that are passed along, and they get to the college level and they can survive. And those that do survive a question as to whether or not they're going to be employable. And if they are employable, whether or not they'll be able to sustain that employment. That's how I see it. And it's really sad because you have people that are in debt and they're not even going to be able to pay off that debt because they can't keep the job or not employable, and that is really unfortunate. I think that the education system has been broken for a very long time. And I don't know if we ever talked about this, but when I taught in one of the school systems, I'm not going to say which one, I'll never forget that I turned in my grades. This is my first semester, right? First time. I'm in my 20s. And I was called in by the department head, and I was told that I had too many students that did not pass the class. And so I had to go back and look at my grades. In other words, I took it to mean that they wanted me to change my grades. My conversation was, well, how did they get to the 9th and 10th grade? They can't read. Now, this is in the 80s, so this is nothing new. So you have students that graduate from high school, they get accepted into college, and you guys know this, they're taking remedial courses their first year of college, something they should have gotten in high school or middle school. So that's my point.
And Mr. 1213 came out swinging. We get to your comment, Mr. 1213. I appreciate the comment because it is a difference now than it was back then, as Vanessa just attested to. She's talking about back in the 80s, mid to late 80s, I'm sure. And a quick answer, we'll come back to you, Mr. 1213. The test scores back then were better, but we'll come back to that. So I appreciate the question. And you will, well, Vanessa already know, but Quan as well as Ernesto, you will see comments at the bottom, and you can chime in on the comments as well from our viewers as you see them in your response to my questions. Also want to welcome Victor Gibson, a very, matter of fact, he's a former teacher in DPS. So I appreciate you tuning in, Baba, as well as Victor Baba Gibson. So I mean, and I say Baba, I'm referring to him. That's his name in the streets. And then I love it. It is quite understandable that Black youth will struggle with a language that is foreign to them. I love it. That's the comment from I love it. And they have another comment. I will get to their second comment in a minute. But Quan, with regards to your experiences, because you're out of the classroom now, you have career services, but you will be going back into the classroom at the college level. So, and we had a conversation last Friday, and we'll get to that later on, because what you had to say last Friday was very, very interesting. And I'm sure to provide some perspective to both Ernesto and Vanessa. But with regards to how you see things, leaving the classroom, now career services, and looking forward to going to the college level, I'm sure, how do you see the educational system, the state of education in America, Michigan, Detroit right now?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a great opportunity for not just the schools, but community and families to really get involved. I think that anytime we've ever had any significant movements in anything in America, it had to be something that was not necessarily just regulated to one entity. So I think that we're in a place where, the success of our students is too daunting of a task just for it to be handled inside of the schools. And so with that being said, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to empower families, empower communities, to really get involved in the overall success of our students.
Okay. And Ernesto, at the community college level and being a former board member, which is a daunting task in and of itself, because I'm on my second stint as a board member for a school, charter school, and it's interesting.
Yeah, there's just so many ways to, approach this conversation. The best way I would say, as we've seen, the system is pretty broken. And I think all the changes, the dismantling of the Department of Education, I think by the current administration, I think that's a result of it being broken. But I think it's been broken to get to the question that was asked about, what is the standard 50, 60 years ago, 60, 70s, and what's the standard now for third and fourth grade? We measure that standard with standardized tests. And even in the state of Michigan, those tests have turned over just so many times.
Yeah.
What have we used as the standard? It was different in the 70s. And this is a nationwide trend as well. And I think this is probably one of the main problems with the system is that when we have something like a standardized test that's built by a for-profit corporation and they get into our classrooms and have access to our students, they use that as those are like their information gathering for what kinds of tests they can continue to produce. And then when they get embedded in the system, obviously public school districts have to buy those tests and states make them standard, and it becomes this sort of corporate overture. But that's not just true in like the statewide testing, it's also true in our textbooks too. We tend to, and this is, Eric, we've done a couple of things about the science of reading in the last few years. And for a long time, it was sort of that balanced literacy approach as opposed to a structured literacy approach. And that's kind of the change that needs to happen, that we have to go back to the science of reading in those early education grades. And that's why if we start them out with sort of a broken way of reading comprehension and literacy, they're going to carry that broken way all the way through K-12, all the way up. And so that's why even before we got on the call, we talked a little bit about what it's like to teach at the college level. And at the college level, we kind of find that, oh my gosh, how did they get through 12 years of public education? They don't even know sentence boundaries. They can't even know where to put a period. And so if they can't do one sentence, how in the earth are they going to build a paragraph? And far be it from how are they going to build an essay?
Right.
So all of those things are just compounded over time. And a lot of it, I don't put it on like parents at all. I think it's hard for parents to get involved. It's hard for parents to have those access points into the school system. And so it's just this idea that kids need all kinds of support. Of course, a lot of it can start at home, but the public school system, with these rates that we're talking about, I think it's pretty fair to say that they're failing those early level grades across the board, especially in disadvantaged and non-white neighborhoods, ones that are in inner cities like Detroit, Ypsilanti, and other places that have disadvantaged populations.
And you bring up a very important point, Ernesto, because myself and Vanessa have gone back and forth quite often, because I respect the narrative. It starts at home. But like I tell people, there's a caveat to that, because if we're talking about the educational system being broken, it was just not broken yesterday. It was broken when these now parents are trying to assist their children. So I use the analogy, and you heard me say this before when I spoke at the event, Washtenaw College a couple of years ago. You heard me give the analogy of Dr. Martin Luther King's aspect of you cannot ask a bootless man to lift himself up by the bootstraps. Under the same token, you cannot ask an uneducated parent to educate their kids because they don't have the tools to do it. So as much as we say it starts at home, under the same token, it also starts in the village, because we have very educated people in the village that should be assisting as well. And this what takes me back to a conversation myself and Quan had last Friday. It never dawned on me, and you can elaborate more on it, Quan, because you have, school age kids. The kids are not being taught in the language that they speak. And what I mean by that, they are using this to communicate. Absolutely. And they communicate in a different way than we communicate. So when it comes to the standardized testing, when it comes to the ACT, SAT, or whatever test, MCAT and all that, that's not, in today's world, that's not how they're learning. And they're learning on their own, but that's not what's being taught in the classroom. I do know a few years ago, one of the issues out in the state of California was to teach Ebonics, because you had teachers that were very adamant about the fact that if we teach them what they know, then maybe they will learn better. And what are your thoughts on that, as well as Quan? I'll go to Quan on this because we did have that conversation last week. What are your thoughts as relates to that being a mindset of teaching them based on coming down to their level?
Yeah, we have a huge generation gap within education. The average teacher age is about 43. And so this is the first time in history where we probably have 5 contemporary generations all at once, right? You got the boomers, you got the Gen X, you got millennials, you have Gen Z, and you have Gen Alpha. And they're very different generations, and really because of the iterations of technology. When we talk about students, they're very fluent in the way that they communicate. And so the average student sends about 1,000 or more pages of text, read and actually write 1,000 or more pages of text a year. And like when I was listening, I think somebody said about not knowing where to put a period, not how to start a sentence. Like it's rules to text messaging, being in groups, being on social media. Putting a period means something, and it means something very negative in text messages. You know what I'm saying? And so things are very, I mean, it's just it's a whole culture that if you are 43 plus, you might not know about it, And this is the main way that students communicate with one another. And so I think that's something that we have to consider because it can maybe be unfair to say that the students don't know how to communicate or whatever, because there's just a generational difference. And this is what I mean. In the next 10, 20 years, when Gen Z are in charge, to get a job is going to mean something very different. All right. And so even right now, like I'll give, to be able to, you have companies, marketing that are trying to break into Discord, into TikTok. It was a big hoopla when, you see it every day. Every politician has a Twitter account. They're trying to get on, TikTok because they're trying to communicate in the language that, Gen Z understands. And so in the next few years, that's going to be common, right? Where it's like, this is the main way, if you send an email or if you send a communication, whatever, I don't want all that. I want to be communicated with in bullet points, right? And you're going to have to know how to do that. Another thing is when it comes to just how things change. Like I can remember when I was in high school, they told us do not get tattoos that are visible, right? Because it's going to inhibit your chance to get a job. That's not the case anymore, right? And so when we look at, not saying that students shouldn't know how to write standard, but, as time goes on, we're going to have to consider, like, what does this type of, they're sending 1,000 messages, pages of messages a year, how do we incorporate that type of reading and writing in our literacy standards? And, when it comes to academic writing, will it be almost like cursive, and would it be like Latin where we only use it in certain situations? Because again, students, this is the main way they communicate. And if it's the main way to communicate, that's how they're going to communicate. And I'll just tell this last story to kind of bring home what I'm talking about. There was a marketing company, a very respected one in the Metro Detroit area, that had a $500,000 contract to, put out materials and everything, right? They lost the contract because they refused to do TikTok, right? So when we talk about real money being lost and made, which is happening right now across those platforms, we got to look at that. Like, they refused to do something because it was beneath them. You see what I'm saying? And so another company got it. I'm pretty sure they used somebody who was, used to communicating in the way that, communication is levied on TikTok or whatever. And so, if we just stop at saying that you're not going to be able to secure a job if you don't know how to, do this standardized type of, that's not going to be good enough. Because they're going to say, well, yes, I can. You're not going to be able to secure a job because you refuse to communicate in this broken way, or the way that you may deem as being broken. So I think there's room to kind of maybe have both considerations when we, talking about the literacy of our students as well.
So before you answer that, Vanessa, because, to your point, Quan, one of the viewers, Victor Gibson, made the comment, curriculum is the key. But will curriculum be written in the language that the kids are used to? And they probably not. So there has to be a happy medium somewhere. And with that being said, Vanessa, how do we address the curriculum that's provided by the state of Michigan or the school districts. How do you address that when the communication with the kids is different than how the curriculum is written?
So if we go by what our guest just said, co-host, I'll call him co-host for today, is it sounds to me what you're saying is that the education system needs to catch up with what's going on in the culture, basically. Okay. We have not caught up with what's going on. I look at it as, first of all, I look at it, I get what you're saying, because it is a whole different language, a whole different way of communicating. However, I'm afraid that will be another way of weeding people out. Okay. If that is the case, then there does need to be a change in how we approach educating these students. And until the universities, until the school systems, until the superintendents say, hey, we're going to have to do this a whole different way, I just don't see, how it's going to work. Now, you just used an example of someone who didn't want to use TikTok. My first question was that in the contract that he was supposed to, or she was supposed to be able to use social media in their way in order to promote that? So he knew that going in. So that was probably a contract that he should have never engaged in. He should have never signed, because he knew that he wasn't going to be able to do it, or that he did not want to do it. Well, one of our guests says that she has, who is that, Jill Sheridan? She says she has a real problem with allowing these changes to occur. Are those changes occurring? I don't see it. I mean, I'm teaching now at University of Detroit Mercy, and we're using a textbook, and we're using the traditional way of how we've been taught. And, before we came on the show, I will say this. I see a difference in the students that I had the last semester than I have this semester. So, I don't know if I can answer your question, Eric. I have more questions based upon what our guest just said, because I don't know if that's going to work. I will say that I have two sons. They're both college educated, and they told me this, and I do know that things evolve. They said they have never had to write an essay. Back in the day, we had to write essays. They never had.
Miles never wrote an essay while he was in college. Wow.
Never had to write. They always did it on the laptop. Whatever essay they had to write, they had to submit. No longhand or anything like that. I'm just using it as an example.
Right? Correct.
How things have, evolved. So, I don't know. That is. I think that's a reality, but by the same token, that means that we have to be re-educated, right? That means that we have to be retrained. My question is, are they even going to invest in that to do that? You know what I'm saying? Invest in us so that we can invest in them.
But Jill has an interesting question. Then I'm going to go to Ernesto, because, Ernesto is Filipino, and, the culture there, and his wife was telling me over the weekend about how things are going over there. Jill says that, where is it? Part of the problem is that you have, and this is not verbatim, where's her comment? Part of the problem is that it doesn't help when our president of the country communicates with the nation via social media. So that's kind of to your point, Quan, because that's where people are communicating. And
all politicians have a social media account, and that's how they communicate with their constituency.
But it's that education. And all those politicians who do that, most of them have a formal education. So
I think that, again, when it comes to, we got to look at the outcome. So when I first noticed it was a change, there was something called the Arab Spring, or there's something. It was maybe 10, 15 years ago. It was a revolution in Middle Eastern countries, and it was pretty much started on social media. That's the way people learned about it. People were catching up with it. They got their instructions from social media, and it changed the whole region, right? we've pretty much had a president that was elected because of social media. You know what I'm saying? So although we may not like it, we see what's happening with it. And then now that you have marketing that is you have an incursion of marketeers that's going on, and not just the Facebook. I mean, Facebook is old book. That's the stuff that Gen X and the boomers are on, right? But they're invading the things that we're not even on. Discord, TikTok, and all these other ones I don't even know about.
Threads and all that.
Yeah, they're going on that, and so they're putting money behind it. And anytime you see a lot of money going somewhere, you gotta follow the money.
You gotta follow the money.
And I'll say it like this: back when and I'll just tell this quick story. There's a documentary about Netflix. And they talk about back in like the late 90s. You guys remember Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster was everywhere. Yeah, Blockbuster was everywhere.
Yeah.
The CEOs of Netflix, they were like, well, you know what? This internet thing, is probably going to really catch on. We're going to make it so that people can utilize the internet to enjoy movies and stuff, right? So they built up their platform. They met with the CEOs of Blockbuster, and they told them about what they were doing. The CEO of Blockbuster says, "Oh, that sounds interesting." He asked him how much. I wanted to say, I think it may have been like 50 million, something like that, right? For Blockbuster to buy out Netflix. The CEOs of Blockbuster, they laughed and they said, "You know what? The internet thing is not going to catch on. We don't want it," right? So 25 years later, Blockbuster doesn't exist, and Netflix is not
is booming.
They worth like 100 billion, open up the door for all other kind of streaming services. And so and I can tell you the same story about streaming as well, right? Streaming CD sales. And so we talk about music. And so the thing is that we want to be Netflix. We don't want to be Blockbuster, right? Because there is a niche of people that say, you know what, but there's something good about having an actual movie and and putting it into the VCR. There's a feel. Same thing about records. Like, I know DJs who are purists. They're like, man, if it's not vinyl, I'm not using it. But that'll appeal to a niche, and it does, has value. But when we look at the winds of change, we have to consider that as well. And so I think that when we're looking at the money, when we're looking at what's going on, I think it's still learning, but learning is just different. And I think that's that's another conversation. How do you produce a love of curiosity and learning among our students, no matter what situations that they're in? If it's the age of AI, if it's the age of Google, when the internet, I remember the first search engine was that I used was Dogpile. So if it's in the age of search engines, age of Google, age of AI, or whatever comes next, how do we make sure that there's a spirit of curiosity and learning within our students?
And G Money Hollywood brings up a very interesting point that I want Ernesto to address, because America is behind the 8 ball when it comes to being competitive in the global educational space. And that's true. I mean, Cuba, as much as people rag on Cuba, they have a 98% proficiency rate as a country. Michigan 44th in the country. But as far as US of A as a whole, I think we're down like 53, 54 when it comes to proficiency as a nation. And being Filipino, Ernesto, how do they approach, learning over there?
Wow. Well, let me just keep it in Michigan for right now, just to get to this particular question. Part of the problem here is we have like over 532 different school districts in the state of Michigan for K-12, which means that we have over 532 superintendents in the state of Michigan. And that doesn't necessarily even count the superintendents at the ISDs and also at the private communities as well. So what we have here is something about 600 and 700 bosses in our state who are somewhat taking direction from boards, from their local districts on how and what should be done. And when you kind of have that disparity across so many systems, there's just no way you could measure it accurately, other than a standardized test, unfortunately, which isn't really that great of a measurement of what a kid can do or what a student can do. But to get anything consistent across that is going to be difficult, I think, and that's kind of why there is a push for those standardized tests. So to me, I think systemically, there's no way that we're going to be able to compare it to some of these other countries in that we have so many layers of administration and so many of layers before we get from here's what the student's going to learn. Well, okay, I have a teacher who does that, who's beholden to a local curriculum assessment, who's beholden to a state objective, whose job depends on their performance based on student rates. So all the way up, by the time that we go through all that layers of stuff, what's been lost is what is the student learning? Can they do the basic things of reading and writing along all that layer of administration? And I think probably the saddest part for me is that we pay for that. Those are our tax dollars paying for that in one way, shape, or another. With, as you can see with the Detroit and Ypsilanti scores, certainly the result isn't even close to acceptable. And I think that's kind of the frustration. So I'll even bump it up to the college level as well. We're one of the few states that doesn't have an agreement among our body that sort of governs transferability across community colleges. So if I take, or colleges in general in the state of Michigan, if I take, for example, a freshman English course at one community college, I have to actually go through some extra steps to get that thing transferred to another one if my college doesn't have an agreement with that other college. But in most states, like in the state of California, if you take it at a community college, that's good at every college you go to in the state of California. And that's just not true here. So there's a little bit of a barrier in that way to get to, this 60 by 30 initiative in our state, which is, as we know, it's 60% of our population will have some kind of degree or trade or skill by the year
2030. Right.
Yeah, I think right now the state's probably at 51. Is this that I look? So there's like 3 or 4 more years to get the population going, but things like that transferability aren't going to help the situation. And it's all about getting our education populated. I want to go back to the test scores for the 3rd and 4th grade just for a minute, because that statewide has shown the biggest drop across it. And it's not too hard to figure out that those were the kids during COVID who were preschoolers and or kindergartners, right? So in those early years of their reading ability, that's when their families were most stressed, when they were under the most anxiety. So it doesn't really surprise me that by the time they hit their 3rd grade level, it's going to be lower than what we've had in the past. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily a result of is our standards so much lower that the rates are so much lower. I do think COVID has a big part of that. The other big piece of that is the science of reading and teaching balanced as opposed to structured literacy. I know that some folks here have gone through K through 12 and they don't really know what phonics is. They just know the structured literacy of, let me just look at that word, let me look at that picture. Oh, okay, I think that says car. I guess it does say car because I see a car over there.
Right,
so yeah. So it's like detective work as opposed to using the phonetic sound of letters to build reading, basically what it is. So to me, I mean, I think it's those two things, and the third one being on the side there, obviously, what's not universal in the state of Michigan anymore, which is universal meals for lunch. I think not having free meals for K through 12 students is a huge mistake in our state. That is a literacy issue. I just don't see a world where if a child is hungry and thinking about where their next food is, how you really expect them to concentrate and do some of those skills that we're asking them to do. So I think it's really to me it's those 3 things more than anything else.
In the meal thing, I forget which states it is, if it's Minnesota or Indiana, but as a result of feeding free meal, breakfast and lunch, and again, I can't remember if it's Indiana or Minnesota, but they saw a year-over-year increase of 15 percentage points in their standardized scores, just from kids being able to eat a full meal at breakfast as well as lunch. So that's interesting in and of itself. And then I know, all three, you can, Mr. 313 speaks about Jawanza Kunjufu's book titled Keeping Black Boys Out of Special Ed. I do know there was an issue in Ann Arbor, in the school district in Ann Arbor, IFSI, not just about special ed, but also dyslexia. You know, but to me, it seems to be by design that so many of our Black boys have been placed in special ed. And that's, you know, and I give a quick shout. I know I told you this story, Vanessa, as well as the viewers on one of the editions of Detroit in Black and White, when I spoke during Black History Month at one of the DPS schools, and it was for the males only, 6th through 8th graders. And there were 3 segments of Black boys in the auditorium: a very engaged group, a semi-engaged group, and this other group of kids they just had in the back. So I'm asking the teacher, like, you know, what's up with them? And they pretty much said, you know, those are the ones that we just don't have time to deal with. And is that fair to those kids? Because I guarantee you that 6th, 7th, and 8th grader that was in the back of the room are now in the 7th, 8th, and high school, 9th grade as well. So Vanessa, you mentioned it earlier about just these kids being passed along. That's an example of it. You pass them along by putting them in a corner, and at the same time, put them in special ed.
And let's talk about the stigma. So I'm not familiar with the book, but it looks like it sounds like it's a good read. I'm definitely going to read it. But I want to use a personal story. My brother, it was right up under me. He was considered special ed. And back then, they would take the kids and put them in a different part of the building, or even in a trailer outside of the building of the school. They do things a bit different now, but it still carried a stigma. So he went through the system thinking that he was unworthy, subpar, even though he had parents in the house that, you know, encouraged him and that kind of thing. And when in fact, we found out much later he had to learn differently than myself. Okay. And so, very, very smart man, very smart man. But we didn't understand that until much later in his life. So when we talk about keeping Black boys out of the special education, I'm all for it because I don't like the stigma that it carries. There's a friend of mine who he's a lawyer, and he has a son. And his son was special ed. They never thought that this young man was going to be successful. He would talk to his friends about, you know, he was very worried about his son. His son is now a practicing attorney who's doing extremely well. So when you start putting people in pigeonholes, and you start to me, looking down on them, it can be an impediment to them becoming successful in terms of their education, being able to read, hitting all those standardized tests and those kind of things, because they don't feel good about themselves.
And this is one of the things, you know, before you chime in, Quan, this is one of the issues that has been talked about over the last few years, about people don't come home with homework anymore. You know, what's that about? I mean, you in the school district, former school district, Ernesto, former teacher yourself, Quan, do they not give homework anymore?
I know and Ernesto can answer this probably better than I can right now, but I know there was an ideology that of something called like a flipped classroom, where, you know, you give students the time in school to actually do the work. So the thinking is that you're there with the teacher, with the expert that can kind of give you those supports that you may need to, you know, finish that homework or that work, you know. But instead of doing it at home, you have time allotted in the day to do it at school or within that classroom.
Yeah, I have a little theory. I have a little theory about why that has occurred over time. It wasn't always like this, you know. Even I would say, like, even I taught high school. Maybe I would say I stopped teaching high school in 2010, and I always gave homework, right? And so over the past, you know, probably I'll go 20 years, you know, people have adopted what we call differentiated instruction, and most educators know what this is, which is, it's simply phrased is meet the student where they're at. Right. So if they're along a certain point of a lesson or of a learning, your scaffolding, you're building it correctly. If the student's at step 1 of that scaffold, you're not going to start teaching step 4 because they're not there. right? They're going to need step 2 and 3 to get there, but some students will be at step 4. So the idea here was that we could do things like flip the classroom, which is to, give all the stuff in advance, and then they come to class with all the knowledge allegedly, and then they take the time to interact with the teacher to do it. So I think what happened over time is that teachers, so that the students who needed a little bit more instruction in the beginning, they stopped giving so much work, because that student at step 1, the hill to climb to get to step 4 might take them a very long time, and by that time, the student at step 4, you're going to lose them. And so I think there's a little bit of that has happened over time where, well, what's the solution then if I'm a good teacher? The solution is to maybe not go so fast, to go a little bit slower, which I think is a little bit reasonable to do. But at the same time, what happens is, well, if the kid can't complete the work in class, why would I give them homework? Because they'll go home and they're supposed to reinforce it. And if they can't do it, what will happen over time? It'll stack on them, and then their grade's going to go down. And so you can see what you can see where I'm going in this conversation along a teacher's perspective. So to me, I think that's what's happened over time, is that by adopting differentiated instruction, which I agree with, actually, I do that all the time in my classroom. It's lightened the load for the people on the top end, which as an outcome for most teachers means I'm going to give a little less homework. And I think that actually what has happened over time.
And we have a lot of, education is a very important issue, obviously, because there are all kinds of comments and questions. So I want to thank the viewers, Gulugichi, G Money Hollywood, who's a regular on all of the platforms when it comes to.
Can I make one response to a comment I saw, Eric?
Which comment was it?
It was from I Love It, who says the following: AI is the boss currently. Adopt it or get left behind, or worse. By the way, I detest these exceptional advancing technologies. That comment couldn't be more true. AI is basically the game changer for everyone, educators, students, para-pros, everybody alike. Because at the college level, if a student, I've seen this, if a student starts turning in AI work from the start of the semester, these days it's kind of hard to figure that out. I mean, it kind of really is. And students use AI much more regularly and in many ways more adeptly than their instructors do. And that's because they're in that technology world. I just started embracing AI in my classroom maybe like a year ago. It's amazing. It can do so many things so quickly. It's changed research. It's changed like, in my view, almost everything. So that's kind of the elephant in the room. As if AI is going to get smarter, faster than we think it is. I think the standing AI right now, I think this is Gemini or ChatGPT. I think they have like it has like a standing IQ of 155 or something like that. It's like a high number, much higher than you would think. So actually, when students see AI, I think they really see it as they should, which is a true tool. The problem becomes is when the AI is doing all the critical thinking for them.
Right.
I don't mind if students use AI at all, but the parameters you set for it is a demonstration of your critical thinking. So if you're just using AI to do your work, you're not learning a thing. But if you're using it to do research and to think and to assemble things critically, I'm all for it.
And we had a conversation as well, Kwame. So I know you want to chime in.
The guy who wrote the Khan Academy, the guy who created Khan Academy, he wrote a book called Brave New Words, and basically how AI will revolutionize education for the better. I think that's the full title. But there are places around the world that use AI tutors, especially in the United States. There's a emerging private school called Alpha Schools, and so they have schools in Texas, New York, San Francisco. They talked about bringing one here, and so the students go through like an AI tutor for like the first 2 hours of the day, and then the rest of the day they're linked up with a guide that kind of ushers them through like whatever their goals are and goal setting and things like to help them accomplish those goals. But in Texas, at least, when it comes to the standardized tests, the standardized test scores have actually improved in reading and across other areas with these AI tutors. And so when it comes to there's another AI system known as Wobots. And so this is with counseling. And so these are AI programs that are trained in cognitive behavior therapy, and they're utilized with providing counseling and therapeutic services for students and adults as well. But what they found out was, at least with the young students, that these AI counselors, they're able to establish rapport quicker with the AI robots than they are with the actual human counselors. And so, you know, that definitely is something, one of the tools in which how it's used. Khan Academy has something called Khan Migo now that utilizes AI with, you know, anything from math tutoring to reading, and it's pretty interesting how it's developed and grown so far. So yeah, I mean, I think AI is something that I think is going to change the way education looks in the future. Counseling is going to look in the future. A lot of things, the way that it's changed. A lot of jobs have been lost already because of it. So that's definitely something that we need to consider, because it's only going to grow more,
expand more, right?
Right.
More.
Yeah. But I have to agree with Ernesto. I believe that it is just yet another tool, but students still have to be able to do critical thinking. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The AI can only do so much, but it cannot do the critical thinking for you. So
I mean, it's a guide. It's a guide that people do not know how to use as a guide. And that's to your point and Ernesto's point, as well as Quan. The critical thinking piece is what has to be learned as well. If you just copy and pasting and not editing it or not creating your own narrative, then you're plagiarizing, plain and simple.
Absolutely. Eric, I was going to ask you, are you going to address ParOrgs has made a couple of comments, and I was wondering.
I'm not even down. There's so many comments I haven't even seen his. This Gula, go 1 second, Vanessa. This Gula Geechee, I had never heard this. Ernesto, you might be able to speak on this, you know, with regards to Mandarin, teaching, you know, Generation Z Mandarin, because that's an easier way to learn than Western languages. This is my first time hearing that, so that's interesting. Is it his first comment right here? Is the curriculum?
Yeah, if the curriculum. So as it relates to the Mandarin language, that seems to be a trend. I've hearing it a lot lately, and I do have a couple of friends who kids learn the language. They are now working, you know, in China. Okay, so that seems to be the trend. I even think there's a DPS school that I don't know what school it is. I'm not sure if it's Renaissance or if was it Flix? Is that Flix?
Is it Flix, Quan?
I think it may be Flix.
Yeah, Flix foreign language immersion.
Yeah, it is Flix.
Yeah. So that does seem to be a trend.
So what ParOrgs is saying is consistent with what all three of you said about AI. At the end of the day, you know, somehow critical thinking has to be part of the process as well as far as teaching. You know, everyone does not have that. Unfortunately, let's keep it real. Everyone does not have that capability to think critically because they're too busy regurgitating things as opposed to thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're talking about immersion schools, really, where they're doing right. So to me, this is about obviously language acquisition. It's better done at an early age. The earlier you start a different language acquisition, the better you are. But there's also a critical thinking piece here. It's because younger brains are still developing, and those neurons that are connecting when they're young and they're growing and still in development, if they're using a different language to do that, they're likely using different neurons and they're making those different kinds of connections. So. And once you hit a certain age in brain development, once those neurons get done, you can't remake those. so that's why it's always pushed to put foreign language at a younger age. You could start earlier, and that's kind of translated into the immersion school where you're learning the material in two languages. Obviously, when you leave, you're going to think about it in English, but you
Right.
also use another language to be able to acquire that knowledge. So it kind of broadens your horizon and allows you to think more deeply about it. So I think that's the thing with immersion schools. They're definitely challenging. I had a relative who went to a full Chinese immersion school, and I think she went for like 2 or 3 years when she was younger. Like I think it was only for like third or fourth grade to try it out. She's like in high school now. She still remembers some of that language
Yeah.
and recalls it as being some of the deepest learning that she did. And even though it's third or fourth grade, I totally believe it because you're in that uncomfortable situation where, and also in public schools especially, some kids have and some kids don't. And when you're in a situation where nobody has the language, it's somewhat of an equalizer because none of you know it. And so we know what that is, our social strata in the country. It can create all kinds of bad feelings. We can talk about dress codes, but all that stuff is all around. Some kids have, some kids don't. And how is that going to make me as a learner, right? Am I in the best situation to learn? And so to me, that immersion is a little bit of an equalizing deal, but it's also like for younger grades where their brains are still developing. I think that's the real advantage there.
And one
So-
thing about all the comments, obviously the topic of education is something that a lot of people want to talk about. And, reading all these comments, Miss Sheila, Par-Or, Gula Geechee, G Money Hollywood, Mr. 1213, Jill Sheridan, Karen Whiston, they are very engaged with regards to the need for education and the need for education to improve, because we can't keep every last Wednesday in August get these M-Step scores and be like, wow, what is going on? Something has to change. And you made a comment, Ernesto, you have all these school districts and then you have these colleges, they're not on the same page.
Yeah.
So you're making it difficult for the students to be, and we talk about how students get passed along, they get into college, and then when they get into college, they're getting left behind because someone may want to go from Washington County Community College to Northern Michigan.
Mhm.
They
Also,
have
I will
to
say that-
take English over again because the standard at Northern Michigan is different than Washington County. The standard at Wayne County Community College might be different than UD Mercy, where both Quan and Vanessa is at. So that's not fair to the students. But we do know college is a business. Let's be real, it's a business.
Absolutely.
So there are gap measures in place where these colleges are going to stay rich and wealthy.
Eric, let me share this with you also. Just probably in the past 2 or 3 years, the state has really started to crack down on allowing students who graduate high school to enroll in developmental education courses. And these would be courses. These are for students who potentially, they graduate high school. They didn't meet a measure to find them as college ready. So they weren't quite ready to take a freshman English or composition or what we're going to call those gateway courses. So in many community colleges, they have a developmental English or developmental math, where you kind of take a couple of these courses and then be ready to be college ready. So most recently in the past year and a half, the state has kind of cracked down on those curriculum programs. Even at our community college, we don't have those courses anymore. You can't take those. So again, this is just a kind of another layer on the system of where if I'm a high school student and I graduated, certainly I could, with the law that it is, I could go to my local community college if I graduated within 15 months of high school, and I could go to community college for free. Okay, so that's true in the state of Michigan. Okay, but the problem is when I go to that community college and I take my placement test, I realize I can't place into any of the courses yet. So I'm really kind of stuck into taking a class that it's likely that I'm not going to fail because I don't have the skill to do it. And again, I definitely see this as a failure of the public system. How do you get a high school degree and then your state is offering you the opportunity to get free college? But when you get to that free college, there's actually no classes that will help you sequence in a way that could, promote your success. You have to go to the first course, and that first course isn't one that you could do. So it's almost like you're just setting that student up to fail. And that's kind of universally what happens. I think that happens at the 8th grade to the 9th grade level as well. If we were to segment from K to 8 and then 9 to 12 from
9 to 12.
Right? So we get 8th graders, and then when they come to 9th graders, It's not hard to find a ninth grade teacher in the state of Michigan to say my students are coming unprepared. And so it's kind of just this kind of gradual feeling at every sort of marker at the levels of K. I'll go even from pre-K to 16, which is, what MI Leap wants to do. That's what they're calling the journey. Everything from pre-K all the way up until 16 years.
You're right. And this is a good one for you, Quan, because as a career counselor, G Money speaks about how in the marketplace, the average person that is appointed to 2 leadership positions in the middle management, upper management, they lack critical thinking skills. And it takes him back to his comment earlier about America is illiterate. But as a career counselor, when you are speaking to people, they tell you what their goals are, how do you address them saying what their goals are with knowing whether or not they will be successful in reaching those goals based on where they are at educationally? So how do you prepare them for getting to their ultimate success?
So I pretty much I do one-on-one with students about what their plans are for after graduation from high school. And so when talking with them, I really try to connect them with people who are like already in those particular fields. And so oftentimes they'll do interviews with those people. Right now we're working on a program known as a program in which we pretty much gather a group of I don't want to say mentors, but it's more like a network, and that's one of the things that we do know, that anybody really, but especially young people, they usually get involved with a career or anything, career related because of somebody that they know, so really building that network early where they know people that may be in a particular industry that they want to go into, or just being introduced and exposed to those different industries as well. And so really giving them that free form opportunity just to ask those questions, to have someone in their network that can kind of help them, go through the different needs and levels that they would need to be successful in those different places and opportunities. I also wanted to kind of talk about Governor Whitmer. She actually signed an executive directive back in April, expanding access to college and skilled training for men in Michigan. And so one of the things that we've seen within the last few years is that there's been a dip in college going, period. But
Right.
There's been an extreme dip in boys across the board, white, black, Hispanic, whatever, going to higher ed, and some would even say to trade school, and definitely taking advantage of Michigan Reconnect as well. And so that goes back to, I think, what the person asked about Jawanza Kunjufu and keeping black boys out of special education. What we find out is that it's a boy thing, period. Boys are recommended for special education more so than their counterparts with the young ladies. They're also recommended for suspensions more and labeled behavior problems more often than
black boys in particular.
Yeah, but black boys in particular, but all boys. Like you go across the board, boys, and so whatever that pushes that, it happens early. And so that disillusionment with school or anything, that can happen very early, especially when it comes to boys being suspended or being recommended for special classes. And so by the time, you get to, senior year or you get to high school, they may not be like, this ain't for me, And so, but with that, there are lots and lots of options. I mean, more so than when I was in school, the only option I had, they would say, you got to go to college. But now, it's actually kind of, there's, trades has always been there, but there's definitely a push for trade. But there's a lot of training programs that, whether it's tech training, cybersecurity, where you don't have to go to school for 4 years. Matter of fact, it wouldn't even be beneficial to go to school for 4 years to get any type of training in tech, because by the time you get through with your degree, everything you learn is obsolete.
Right.
It's gonna be obsolete.
Right.
So there are options. I know that Apple has created a developer academy in downtown Detroit. They're expanding that. There's another program called Empower that does tech training as well, where similar thing. They connect they connect students to careers after, I think it's like a 10-month training program. They connect students to careers. Matter of fact, they guarantee that if you finish the program, they'll situate you in a tech, oriented career, based on their partners and things like that. And the same thing with the Apple Developer Academy, which they actually pay you for the 10-month program. You get paid every month to actually go through the program. And I think the Apple Developer Academy is the only one in North America. So all the rest of them are in different continents and everything. So I think that, students have they have more support and more resources than ever before. But I think, to the point of, was it Gullah? I forget. I don't know. It was G Money. G Money said something. Yeah, said about just critical thinking, and I think really ushering those students to have those connections where they're able to get training. I've been to the Apple Developer thing. They really, it's a great campus. They really deal with critical thinking because it's very open ended. Where if there's an issue or a problem, something they train students to create useful apps, and so there's like, hey. They really lean on the students to be like, okay, what is a problem that's something that can be rectified by an app, right? And so they work in teams to kind of figure these things out, design thinking and all that. And so I think really just pushing students towards those opportunities to get trained. And the crazy thing is that there's a lot of college students that go through the program as well, because I believe that it actually helps them with that critical thinking. So there's a lot of opportunities that students they do have to kind of increase their critical thinking. But, first of all, being aware of those programs and really having somebody in their corner to kind of push them to those programs as well.
Right. I want to thank you all. I'm 2 minutes over, but I want to definitely thank all three of you for joining me this evening. Very productive conversation, a lot of comments, which lets me know people out there paying attention. And for all the viewers on YouTube as well as Facebook Live, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. And thank you again, Vanessa. Thank you again, Quan. Thank you again, Ernesto. We got to do this again because there's so much more to talk about when you talk about education. Because what I liked about tonight's show, there was not any bitching and moaning. It was talking about the issues and how we can come up with solutions to improve education for these Black boys and girls all across America, particularly in our neighborhoods, living right here in Southeast Michigan. So again, Vanessa, Quan, and Ernesto, I thank you. I will be in touch with all of you to have another conversation because next month is parent-teacher conference season. So we have a conversation around that. So thank you again. Good evening to the viewers. Enjoy the rest of your week. And I'll see you next Monday on the 22nd. Hopefully I will have mayoral candidate Solomon Kinlock as my guest. That's the date we agreed to. So we'll see. Hopefully.
That's what's up. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's so nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
And good luck, Quan, over at UD Mercy next semester.
You'll
All
be fine, Quan.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. And again, to the viewers, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. And until next Monday, peace and love. And see you then.